A presentation on the Clark Creek Fire by Mr. Tom Elder.
Thanks, you guys. I really feel like I'm a little out of my depth here because I am not a firefighter like all of you guys were. I fought fires for all of 4 seasons 47 years ago. So, it's like listening to a doddering old fogey, that back in the day, this is what happened. I understand you want to hear what happened at Clark Creek. To the best of my ability, I'll tell you, I'll be referring to my notes because it's just the way I roll. First of all, it was a great honor. It is a great honor to speak to all of you guys. It's really a peak experience for me. I've always admired firefighters and what they do. And I know all the people, I know Dutch John and everybody is very grateful for what you're doing here. So just to give you a very brief run-up to whatever street cred I have, I grew up in Wichita, Kansas. Kansas was notably not interesting enough for me, so within a week of graduating from high school, I lit out for the West. My brother, he worked for the Forest Service as a surveyor, and I wanted to work for the Forest Service. I wanted to be you guys. And he said, well, go on up to Idaho and ask him for a job. So I thumbed my way up from Denver to St. Mary's, Idaho, and walked into the St. Mary's job service and said, I'm going to work for the Forest Service. And they said, well, we have a GS2 forestry tech position up St. Joe River at Red Eyes Ranger Station. And I said, really? Well, okay, let's go. I had no idea what it would entail. It was forestry technician. The local term was brush ape. I was one of those people that was piling up all of the slash from the logging in preparation for burning it in burn piles. But we are also an auxiliary fire crew. So I remember witnessing my first fire devil, or I guess people call them fire whirls or something nowadays, where there was like something that looked like a Zippo lighter at arm's length, but it was this tornado of fire, a couple hundred feet away. And I started seeing some pretty awesome stuff. And I graduated to district fire that first year, worked district fire again, way out in the Tules. And then for 2 years, I worked on interregional fire crew, a St. Joe interregional fire crew, which was what we called the hotshot crews in the northern region at that time. And I loved it. And I always feel a little bit careful when I get to this because people die on fires, so I don't want to glorify it too much. But I thought fires were awesome. Watching a run, like on the Hog Fire, we got chased out by these runs up these madrone-covered hills, and it was just awesome. Like watching a volcano go off. But of course, people die on them. And I started going to school at University of Idaho, and in fact, the Forest Service paid for my college education because all those fire checks are what I was using to scrape by in Moscow at fire. All of my classes, I ultimately did not go into fire. I could have, like around 1980, I could see which way the wind was blowing, and that if you got in at ground level in 1980 in fire, probably was a really good career path. But I didn't do that. My degree is in wildlife recreation management, which is basically a parks degree. But I've always been very, very interested, enthralled with fire, and concerned about fire ecology. I'm really concerned about the condition of forests and the Forest Service's ability to address it. So at any rate, I did that for a couple of years. University of Idaho was adamant that I had to go to a summer session, so I lost out on my third year of interregional fire crew, but that's okay. I went on to work as a wilderness ranger, and then I worked at various parks, national parks. Then I met somebody, fell in love. She had a better flight path for her career, so I bailed and became a teacher, high school teacher. And as she says, I incorporated the Clark Creek fire into my biology class, and she seemed to think that if the principal knew what I was talking about in the classroom, that I would have been called on the carpet. But it made total sense to me. I mean, it's ecology. It's a pressing need for people to address what's happening in the West. I did that for 25 years, and then I retired. And now I just do this for fun because I like to speak to people, and I really believe in Forest Service ethic. I believe in philosophy of the Forest Service, conservation. Yeah, I really, though, I'm not saying I'm a poser, but it occurred to me last night when I was speaking to some of you, I wasn't really expecting the degree of camaraderie that obviously exists with a lot of you people. I only worked 4 years. I never had anybody I knew personally die on a fire, and I know that many of you people probably have. And it's sort of like a Kurt Russell vehicle backdraft, the brotherhood that exists among firefighters. I only kind of understand that from a distance, but I can kind of see that, and I don't exactly envy it because I'm happy with the path my life has taken. But it was moving for me to speak to you guys last night. Let's see. Well, just as a little inkling of that, when I was on the IR crew, we were really tight because we were working as like a quasi-paramilitary unit or something, and traveling together, living together, and about half of them had nicknames, Hobbit. And for the first and only time, I'll reveal to this select group of people what my nickname was. But I'll deny it if it comes out on the streets of Vernal. They called me Toto, because that's from Kansas. And I was okay with that, because Toto is a good-looking and heroic figure in Wizard of Oz, so I was Toto for a couple of years. I was working in 77 when Gene and Dave and Dwight died up on Clark Creek. And that was a hot year. And, from my financial standpoint, that was a year that allowed me to go back to school with more money than I anticipated. But 10 firefighters died in 1977. 3 of them died up here on the Ashley. And so I talked about it in school. Ivan Erskine, who some of you may remember, who unfortunately has passed away, he gave me the information about what happened at Clark Creek, and I showed the kids the slides and tried to explain to them what firefighters were trying to accomplish and what happened up there. But I don't have in-depth information. I'll give you what I have, and some of you probably already know more about it than I do. But I also wanted, I'm an interpreter by nature. I like to speak to people about natural phenomena. And I saw that little memorial trail with the little plaque that had been erected by the locals in honor of the people that had died. And I thought, well, this is a good place to talk about fire. It's right across the canyon. You can talk about what happened in 1977. So I pushed the Forest Service in the person of that lady to let me talk there. So once a week for about 7 or 8 weeks, I'm there, and usually there's someone there to listen. Sometimes there's somebody who knew Gene or Dave or Dwight, usually Dwight. I have friends that graduated high school with Dwight. Dwight was my age, 23, when he died. So beyond that, I also would like, and this is me pushing my private agenda, so I do not speak for the Forest Service in any way, but there are 3 memorial cairns to those guys down in the burn of Clark Creek, where you've got a bunch of rocks piled up, and at the top, there's a drip torch cemented onto the top with their names, and who they were and what their dates of living and dying was. But they're not visited by anybody, to my knowledge, except rarely the Forest Service. The Forest Service, I can't say how rarely because I don't work for the Forest Service, but previously, I know that sometimes they would have a range ride up there, and they would reconstruct what happened on July 1977. But I don't know if they're still doing that. I would like to see it accessible to people so they can walk up there in safety if they wish to. So that might happen. But the Ashley it's a great forest to front and center fire ecology and the problem in the West with abundant fuels, a lot of people, changing climate, and fires. And the Ashley, I'm kind of proud of the Ashley, even though I never worked for them. They've been, as far as I can see, quite aggressive at trying to have prescribed fires and burn out the fuels. And to my mind, they've done a pretty good job, and they have great resources. They've got the VC at Red Canyon. They've got the Clark Creek Memorial. They've got Ute Tower, the last standing fire tower in the state of Utah. So it seems to me like a perfect place to talk about fire. And so I've been pushing that agenda for some time now, and the Forest Service has been pretty cooperative. So 1977, what happened at Cart Creek? If you could put up that map. On that day, there had been a little storm. A thunderstorm had moved over, sprinkled a little bit of rain, but it's hard to say that any of it even reached the ground at this place. About noon, a little before noon, and there was a strike about noon, and I presume most of you are well familiar with the terrain, but it was right where Cart Creek and Spruce Creek come together, about right here. Now, I'm not reading all of these little tags, so if you see me be a little bit off, go with the map. But David Hatch, I believe it was David, was the FMO, and he saw it first. He saw it from across the canyon over here, close to what used to be Bootleg Campground. Was changed to Firefighters Memorial Campground after the tragedy. And he called it in and said, hey, we got a fire over there at Cart Creek, and notified Helitech. And Helitech helicopters started dropping people off in this area it's fairly flat. You can see from the contour lines, or when you look across the canyon, it's not really steep where the two creeks run together, although it does steepen considerably right down here, which kind of enters into the story a little bit. At any rate, when he saw it, he thought it was like a half an acre, and it was burning, and he said, we need some guys on this. So the helicopters started dropping off pairs of people, and they started building line. And in addition, up in Manila, the rodeo was going on, just by timing. And a lot of the Forest Service personnel were at the rodeo. So the rodeo loudspeaker came on and said, would all Forest Service personnel report to the front gate? And they received their marching orders that, hey, we got a fire, you've got to handle it. So people started popping up on this fairly flat, rolling sage meadow that was between Cart and Spruce Creek. Cart and Spruce Creek. And for a couple of hours, conditions did not change much. And another thing I'm really careful about, or I try to be careful about, is I don't want anything I say to disrespect decisions that were made, because it's really easy to Monday morning quarterback and say, well, you should have done this, you should have done that. But at the same time, the Forest Service wants to know what they could do better. So I am going to reference a couple of things that were important factors. And one of them was, and this was reinforced for me by a video, you can probably find it on the internet if you wish to, but one of the survivors is on video talking about what it was like that day. And he said he had come from the rodeo, and he said when we were walking to the fire, the flames were about 1.5 feet tall, and they were joking about how they'd be back to the rodeo before the rodeo was over. And they weren't worried at that point. The fire was behaving not normally. I mean, it wasn't completely unnatural, but it was unlikely, because rather than having a gentle upslope flow, which is what you would expect on a hot summer day, there was a downslope flow of like 6 miles per hour. And this fire was backing into that wind. It was going uphill, but it was fighting the wind, had a headwind, and it wasn't going very fast, and those flames were not very tall. So the firefighters started building unanchored line, but it wasn't below the fire topographically. It was on the sides of the fire, especially on the east side, and they were going to try to bring a line up above the fire where it kind of ridged out right up about here, and see if they could cut it off and have it burn up to the line, and then they'd have it handled. That's what the plan was. But even in the weather report, they mentioned that there would probably be some erratic gustiness that day, although they didn't predict it for as early as it actually happened. But what happened, of course, is that the weather conditions changed. The wind started blowing uphill at about, well, I don't know the exact miles per hour that was calculated, but it was enough to change these backing 2 to 3 foot flames into more like, 20 or 30 foot flames going up the hill. And the closer it got to this steep area, the more fuel it ran into, and the worse things got. Well, at any rate, these people had all been told off get to the black. Anything goes south, get to the black. And the crew that was on this side, the east side, that included Gene Campbell and Dave Noel. Gene Campbell was 57 years old. He was a local boy. He seemed like he was I never met him. I never met any of these guys. But he seemed like he was a very well-respected person, but also very skilled. He was not a newbie. And Dave Noel was 35, I believe, and he just got married. He didn't even have a year of marriage before his wife was widowed. Anyway, they were at the back of the line that was the crew that was moving to the east to try to get out of the way of the flames, because it seemed like further down, the flames had crept a little bit further to the east than they had when they were working up above. And those flames were kind of roaring up towards them, so they were side-hilling to get out of the way of that wall of flames. And almost all of them did, except the last one turned around and there was no Gene, there was no Dave, there was just a wall of flames and a bunch of smoke. At any rate, the helicopter saw what had happened to them. The helicopter was hovering overhead, saw that the fire front had intensified all across the lines, and saw the position that these guys were in, watched the crew scamper out to the black, to the east, but also saw that Gene and Dave didn't get far enough, and they became confused in the smoke and the flames, and they turned and started going uphill. Then they tried to go east again. There was a helipad out here someplace, and they knew it was out there, and they were headed for that apparently, but the fire caught them there and killed them. Hopefully quickly. No one knows how much they suffered or anything. No one was there. But it was in really light, flashy fuels, pretty much like what you see today. Bitter brush, Mount Mahogany, and grass, not much in the way of heavy fuels at all, and went through really quickly. But it also did not have burning logs littering the ground for a long time. So people could go back in within a few minutes and just verify that, in fact, their friends were dead. And then they backed out because it was still really hot. That's what happened to Dave and Gene on the east side. On the west side, Dwight Hodgkinson, this kid of 23. I play guitar with a guy down in Vernal, and he remembers Dwight. He speaks about him very fondly. Anyway, they were with a crew that was going to the black through one of the places where a line had been constructed, and there was a gap in the flames, in the wall of flames, and that's where they were headed. And there was a woman behind him, and Dwight, his instinct of the moment was to say, well, go ahead of me, and let her go ahead of him, and he took up a position at the end of the line. And the helicopter saw what happened there, too, because it quartered over here and watched what was happening. And they were descending more steeply over here than actually where Gene and Dave were caught over here. It did steepen. About the place where those cairns are, you could see that it starts to steepen, and they would have had a hard time moving very fast. Well, these people were descending a similar slope over here. Then the helicopter saw Dwight at the end of the line suddenly be confronted with a juniper that just torched. Really suddenly, and Dwight stopped, and then he turned around and he ran back. And the helicopter tried to get in front of him, and somehow communicate to him that, no, you should not do this. Go back, go the way that everybody else did. But he didn't see that, or for whatever reason, he did not move on that, and he tried to scramble up through those rocky bluffs that have got some heavier fuels in them up there, and that's where he died. And those are the bare bones facts as I know them about how they actually died. Are there any questions yet? It happened very quickly, too. I mean, right about at 3, it didn't happen instantaneously because it seemed like the downslope wind started dropping and then the upslope wind started, but it seems like it was just a couple minutes that things changed dramatically. So no questions?
I had one about the heli-spots. There seems to be a couple heli-spots. Were they moving those as they were getting people up in there?
They were, and in the report, which I have right here, and anyone can find on the internet, in the report they state that the helicopter pilot, I don't know his name, but he seemed like he really knew his business, but he had to back off the helipads a couple of times, and the understated, implicit comment there is, it seemed like, maybe this was a more dangerous situation than people were aware of. because you had to back off the helipad a couple of times. Of course, when somebody dies, I don't know if 10 people died nationwide in that year. They were the only deaths in Utah that year, and I'm not sure there have been other deaths that are fire-related deaths in Utah, aside from these three. If there are, I'd be glad to know about it. But when they did the report, there were some things that they flagged and said, we need to look at this. And we look at the 10 standard firefighting orders. They flagged the first 5. Like, communications is one. The communications were not perfect. There was a point, for instance, where one of the guys was up at the top trying to monitor from above, was communicating with one of the people that was a line boss, but by just, yelling through the smoke and the flames, and didn't have a better way to communicate than that. An obvious one is, I don't know how pointedly they were thinking about an escape route. Because, of course, you always want to think in terms of how you're going to get out if things go south. And there was another thing. And again, just in the interest of full disclosure, I tell you these things, not as criticisms. But most of the people who were deployed were deficient either as far as their red card accreditation goes or their fire school accreditation goes. And the report said that those things had been bumped back in the season in preference to functional projects that needed to happen on the forest. And they hadn't completed all the training for all of these guys and women. So 1 through 5, they had something to say about those first 5 of the 10 standard firefighting orders, and also with number 10, which I cannot remember. So after that happened, of course, the Forest Service got very busy, and I think there were like 330 people on it before the end. It blew up this ridge. You can see the ridge kind of flattens out here, and if you look across that, well, you guys have got a much better view of it than me. It's flatter, and there's sort of a sparse ponderosa pine forest there. I think it roared up and took all that out, but I don't actually know where the perimeter got to down here. But it was around 1,500 acres in the end. And it didn't do, as far as I know, anything spectacular after that one run that killed 3 guys. And they had rain, like you guys have had. They had rain that helped them control it a couple days later. And that was the end of it. They recovered, of course, their comrades' bodies and returned them to their families. And, I don't know. I suspect that they're buried down there in Vernal, one of our cemeteries, but I have not looked that up to see where they might be. But the cairns show where they fell, and they're still there. Well, again, on behalf of all the people who live in Utah and in the Uinta Basin and Daggett County in particular, thank you for everything that you guys are doing. I'm glad that it apparently has come off with nobody getting seriously hurt. And I hope you guys have a safe fire season. I'm a little worried about it. The reason that I talk about this stuff all the time is because I can see the conditions that a lot of the forests are in, and I'm very worried that there are going to be true conflagrations in the future in Utah and elsewhere. I hear Jasper, for instance, just took a beating. Jasper up there to the Canadian Rockies, right within the national park. I think something like a third of the town is burned down or something. It's been quite a disaster for the park. What was it I was going to say? Something I was going to say. Well, no, I don't really have anything to say. Thank you. I appreciate you listening to me.
Tom, thank you so much for that. We sure appreciate it. Not often do we, get invited to come somewhere where there's this type of history, and we're honored to have you as part of this, so we can remember what happened at Carr Creek and never forget. So thank you for continuing to do this, all summer long, and we are looking forward to that 50th celebration.
That's right.
Of this fire.
That's
We're
right.
looking forward to coming back and helping you honor our fallen brothers.
Reflections on the Card Creek fire from Operations Section Chief Mike Bertinoli and Incident Commander Brett Waters, Great Basin Team 3.
Jumped out of my fire engine that I was in and immediately fell off of it and burnt my hand on a piece of sagebrush. So that was my first experience. But other than that, this landscape's peppered with fires that I've been on over the years, so a lot of memories. I love it. But with that, I think just quickly, some of the differences is, well, some of the similarities. We still fight fire the same way that we did in 1977. You still have a whole group of people. Right now to date, there's probably roughly 200-ish on the hill. This fire has been staffed with 400 up till date in the last 2 weeks. And every action is with a hand tool or a chainsaw to move around that fire to put it out. So tactically, you're getting a group of folks together to dig hand lines around that fire, utilize hand helicopters, which are probably nicer and faster now, but doing the same thing that they did 40 years ago. With that said, I think some of the things that probably have changed is some of our rules of engagement that are focused on a lot of the things that Tom spoke about here. The way we engage, he talked about the 10 and 18 fire orders and how those have really impacted us and moved into our mindset. And you don't do certain actions on fires if certain scenarios exist. One of our 10 standard fire orders is fight fire aggressively, but provide for safety first. And I think it's really ingrained in our culture. And so rather than charge in, it seems like we step back and make sure that we're making good calls before we engage, not to second guess anything that's happened in the past because their experience was theirs. But I would like to say that, or think that we've kind of grown in that culture. And then just some of the other things that technology has brought to us with mapping, our ability to track and watch firefighters have really changed over the years. So it's been great, but it's also it's young people marching up into the hills to dig hand lines around fires. So foundationally, we're kind of in the same spot, and I like that. I think it's good. I feel like I've probably said enough. I don't know. Brett's our incident commander. Do you have anything to add?
No, a lot of the things that Tom mentions and Mike mentions are very true. Wildland firefighting is steeped in a long tradition. I came from Montana in 1947. We lost a bunch of folks called the Mad Gulch Fire, and we have this every year. We tend to have problems, and we end up losing firefighters. Mother Nature's in charge. We try to herd the fire around. We try to manage it as best we can, but Mother Nature's the one that does it. You know, like Tom says, if the rain came. The rain came here the day after Mike called us. In fact, there was hail on the side of the road. I thought it was almost snow. And before we get here, the fire's going to be out. But the fuels, it's super dry. How we manage our forests, how we manage the fuels, we put it out. And now there's a lot of diseased trees out there, which just add to the fuel. And so we're